happened. In the middle of the country, the middle states have all gone to the Republicans and gone to Trump, and most of the coastal states have voted for Joe Biden. And those are the coastal states are the one where there's more diversity and there's more acceptance of equality, liberty, justice, and there's more debate, and maybe relatively people who are better educated with a college degree or a postgraduate degree. But in a country like India, where in a country like US, where the democracy is all 300 plus years old, and we believe that they are far more advanced, and still we're seeing this. That the country is split in two factions. Then where do we stand in India is the question. And what kind of a future are we going to build for ourselves? What kind of a constitution are we going to develop for ourselves? It's very concerning. And I think it's important that this is something that we discuss openly, because I was in a session with a Supreme Court judge, retired Supreme Court judge recently as in pre-COVID. COVID is a blur, and what happened in the last 8 months, but when we spoke that, we complained a lot to him about how the judiciary is broken and how judiciary doesn't have transparency, how judiciary is not meritocratic, so on and so forth. And he said, that's fine, you can come and question me, but how many of you are actually going and taking this conversation back home into your house or into your group of friends? Is civil society speaking about this? Or are you just pointing fingers at somebody and just complaining? Are you being part of the change that you want to see? Or are you just a person or bystander who just keeps commenting on things? I think as an educational institution, it's important for us to view this very seriously, because apart from imparting knowledge, I think when students graduate from us, they should walk away with that responsibility of being a citizen that upholds the constitutional values of the country. And today, any party, whatever motivations they have, they're made up of people. And those people have come from India. And if they're going in a certain route, there's always an opportunity for a person within the party to balance that. But if that doesn't exist, if those people don't go into the system, and the narrative can become very skewed very quickly. What I have seen in our own students in the last 35, 40 years, a large number of the students who have gotten good jobs have moved to the US and are living there because they're getting a better quality of life. And I don't judge them for wanting a better quality of life. But after Geetam, education is not cheap, and your parents are able to afford this, that means relative to everyone else in society, you come from a place of privilege. And the choice after going through this education is, what can you do to build a better nation? What can you do to build a better constitution? Because the constitution has to keep shifting. It may have been built 70 years ago. As we change, as the economy evolves, as mindsets evolve, we need to change. And if every government is either majoritarian or has their own vested interest or agenda every time they come into power, then what kind of a future are we heading into? And I think those are some of the factors that have driven me to be in public life. It's not easy. It's not at all easy, because even as a member of parliament, whatever party I belong to, I feel almost powerless, because, okay, you can go to the parliament, you can raise questions, but can you actually make a decision? And if I were to give up saying that I can't do anything, then I'll just sit at home. But if you go, maybe out of 100 things that you say, one thing that you say is absorbed, and that one thing impacts 1 million lives. Then if 100 people think like that, imagine how much impact you can have. I think that's what we want to see in our students, in our young leaders, that one person can change the world. And that attitude, if we can really believe in it, I think the Constitution will keep improving and will become stronger to protect everything that we believe in and take us into a better future. And what really concerns me is the way society is being divided on the basis of race, religion, caste, gender, and completely against the principles of our constitution and many constitutions across the world. And I see a lot of young citizens pandering to that in this social media era, where everyone is seeing world as black and white. There's good and bad. There's people who are on my side and who are on the other side, and I completely disagree with that. But in an environment of hero worship, either you're worshipping Modi or you're worshipping somebody else, it's dangerous. Every individual is different. Every individual is entitled to their own opinion, and they should feel free and comfortable to share it instead of having to be a mob, right? Because individuals are intelligent, mobs are dumb. And mob justice seems to be the prevalent form of justice today in the social media era. And these are times that I'm not, there is a lot of hope, not that there is no hope. I see a lot of positivity and I see a lot of young people who want to make a difference. But the more people who come into this environment, the more people who want to contribute, I think a better India and a better constitution that we can create. I've taken a little more time than I wanted to, but just spoke my heart. Sridhar Gari, can you speak for a few minutes and then we can ask Dr. Roy to come into the conversation.
Thank you, Bharat Garu, for that wonderful presidential address. And I think often we keep wondering what is the journey of a great nation like India and how it should be, right?
Nagendra Garu, will you say something?
Yes, sir. I want to introduce the city for
Sure.
Go ahead.
We started President started with this whatever because the exposure he had in Stanford and other universities. He wants to build a policy institute in our university. So he established a Kautilya School of Public Policy recently. Professor Sridhar is heading as a director of the school. We want to have not only the policy related research under that an institution, but we want to build a very, what I can say, a sharp public policy experts under our that school, and he is looking for the faculty not from the India, and he is willing to spend considerable resources to bring best of the faculty wherever it is available, so that he can have a meaningful contribution to public policy area in India. Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt, Professor.
Oh, no, thank you so much, Nagendra Garu, for giving the context of our school. As you rightly mentioned, Kautilya School of Public Policy is a little baby among so many giant institutions at Geetham. And we always enjoy the warmth that we are in between so many technologists, scientists, humanities experts who are amongst us. And we want to kind of look at saying how can we move the 24,000 students who are amongst us to understand public policy and feel empowered with the power of public policy. Just reflecting on this wonderful day, Bharat Garu outlined many important aspects of present day scenario, and I would just like to kind of reiterate a few of them. I think when we go back to the time when the Constitution was written, we were facing balkanization as a threat to the nation. The idea of India itself seemed quite unsustainable, right? There were violence across. How will we kind of come together as a nation? And then we went through a phase where there was a central, powerful center in the Indian governance. And with the 73rd and 74th Amendment, which came almost 26 years ago, we got the decentralization of governance started, right? I wouldn't say has happened, but at least started, right? And in the last few years, thankfully, we are talking about cooperative federalism, right? And I think that's a very interesting transition that our country has taken, and all enabled by the same constitution, which wanted to prevent balkanization, is today talking about cooperative federalism, is talking about decentralization of power. And I think that's the beauty of a running constitution and a living constitution. The second interesting idea that I want to look at is what was debated during that time, is saying that there is so much of diversity in India, so much of downtroddenness in India, and many conflicts, both social and economic. And and everybody wanted to see, can a single document be our answer to all these different conflicts and struggles, and can we move towards a welfare state, right? And even at inception, when our constitution was being written, the journey towards a welfare state was established as an idea. And it's important for us to now continuously question ourselves, saying that why are there deaths due to malnourishments? Why is there parts of India where our infant mortality rates and maternal mortality rates are worse than sub-Saharan African countries, right? So where are we in that journey of welfare state in India, and how can Constitution continuously play the role of a guiding light to guide all our actions towards this? And I think a third important idea, and this came with a conversation I had with a retired Supreme Court judge, Justice Santosh Hegde, a few years ago. And he was talking about what is the importance of Constitution. And he told me that actually the Constitution is not a document by which the governments will rule its citizens, but Constitution is a document by which citizens are empowered to rein in the governments that they are being governed by, right? And I think that's a fundamental nature that all of us have to imbibe, telling that the Constitution gives each one of us inalienable rights to live a fulfilling life, where the head can be held high without fear, and each one of us can try to do the maximum we can given our potential capabilities, right? And finally, remembering Ambedkar and what he said many during the time of framing the Constitution of us getting political equality, but in the background of us having deep economic and social inequality. If we don't put enough energy and if we don't work towards removing both economic and social inequality, the whole idea of one person, one vote having same value will no longer be relevant. In the age of the money power, the muscle power, and various other distortions that happen in people expressing their opinion, we should always go back and question, saying that how do we empower our Constitution to guide us on this path, and how can we build a wonderful, prosperous India for all? And I think one important question for all of us to think is, say that collectively, can we be rich before we become an old nation or a nation of old people, right? So what are we doing about the demographic dividend? And these were the thoughts that I thought, I'm sure Professor Anupama Roy will also develop on as during her talk. I would like to thank the School of Humanities for giving me this opportunity. Thank you. Look forward to the talk.
Thank you, Sridhar Garu. Dr. Imtiaz Gar, can you please introduce Professor Roy, and then she can deliver her lecture?
Yes. Thank you, Director Sir and President, for laying the context of today's talk. It gives me great happiness to introduce Professor Anupama Roy to the students and the staff of the Geetham University. I am doubly delighted to introduce to you my former professor. I had the good fortune of studying Indian Constitution, Indian government and politics under her, and it has served me very well as I teach Indian Constitution now to students here at the Geetham University. Professor Anupama Roy is a professor of political science at the Center for Political Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. A highly regarded academic and teacher, her research interests include citizenship studies, law and politics, gender and migration, and of course, the Indian Constitution. Her latest book, Dimensions of Constitutional Democracy, India and Germany, studies the theme of democratic transition and a transformative constitutionalism in a post-war and a post-colonial country. Her recent book also includes Election Commission of India, Institutionalizing Democratic Uncertainties, which is one of the first academic monographs on a crucial public institution to study it within the larger functioning of Indian democracy. Professor Roy also has an abiding interest in legal and substantial issues of citizenship, as reflected in her acclaimed writings, Mapping Citizenship in India and Gendered Citizenship, Historical and Theoretical Explorations. Finally, Professor Roy is also a public intellectual. She has spoken on the state, on law and citizenship at many public fora, newspapers, and most recently on a podcast. So we are very delighted to have you here with us. And with this, without further ado, I'd like to invite you to give your talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Imtiaz. Thank you, staff, faculty, academic leaders of Geetam University for inviting me and for asking me to speak on a topic which is not just relevant for the country today, but as the director said, for the entire world, in a context where there seems to be so much ferment on what political authority is and what the relationship between political authority and citizens is, the ideal frameworks of this authority, and how exactly this relationship can be changed and made more democratic. So there seems to be, in a sense, a commemoration of a day, 70 years back, where the nation adopted a document, which was supposed to be or expected to be providing rules of guidance for behavior for both political leaders and for the citizens. I always keep a copy of, Imtiaz would remember, I brought a copy of the Constitution always with me to the class. And as I discussed themes, I flipped through the pages of the Constitution to show exactly where these provisions are and how they must be interpreted. And so I do have the latest copy of the Constitution with me. And the reason why I'm displaying it as a prop is because it's post-dated. It says 2021. And this was bought sometimes before the lockdown. And it's almost prophetic because there doesn't seem to be any possibility of something to be done on the Constitution or to change the Constitution, because the Parliament seems to be permanently deferred till the time the pandemic is over and we get to meet. So this Constitution of India is a copy of the Constitution as amended by the Constitution 104th Amendment. So the 104th Amendment, as most of us would know, was an amendment of the Constitution that extended the reservation for the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes in the Parliament for beyond the 70 years that the Constitution had originally laid down. And it also removed the reservation for the Anglo-Indian community, the 2 seats that the Anglo-Indian community had. So, and an interesting thing about the EWS debate was, and this is something that concerns my research interests, because this debate took place on the last day of the last Lok Sabha, when the Citizenship Amendment Act was also being discussed, and that kind of fell through because the EWS bill was being discussed and had to be passed. So and we all know again that the Citizenship Amendment Act was brought before the next Lok Sabha and pushed through the Parliament in a space of about 15 days, maybe through both the houses of Parliament. So the reason I propped up this copy of the Constitution, and the reason I identified the 104th Amendment as the most updated amendment of the Constitution, is to maybe, in a sense, say that the Constitution of India, of course, has not been static. So it has been a changing document. A changing document does not necessarily, however, mean that a document must necessarily change in order to be democratic. So there are two kinds of arguments here. The arguments indicate debates that exist between the constitutionalists and the Democrats, and the kind of contests they have over the original text of the Constitution and how the original text of the Constitution ought to be interpreted. Are there any evaluative frameworks within which this text can be interpreted, and what is it that can be changed and how it can be changed? So there's this entire debate around judicial review in the in the context of the Indian Constitution, where an assertion of judicial power has taken place, right from 1950 when the First Amendment happened, right up to the through the contest over the NJAC and the contemporary debates on Article 32, where the powers of the judiciary have been asserted in the context of the power of the parliament to change the constitution. So the power of the constitution to make a law is different from the power of the constitution to power of the parliament to change the constitution. So whereas the judiciary can exercise scrutiny over law or the legislative powers of the constitution, the power of the judiciary to exercise scrutiny over constitutional amendments has been expanded by the judiciary through judicial pronouncement. So that's not a power of the judiciary that's written in the Constitution, that has been enhanced and expanded through the decision-making powers of the judiciary. So the idea of a living constitution is embedded in a kind of an institutional conflict within the domain of the state, within the domain of the state between two institutions, public political institutions that have different kinds of responsibilities. So one can talk of the parliament as having the responsibility. Now I'll say responsibility instead of saying power, because this responsibility is not only of lawmaking. It's assumed that the legislative powers of the parliament are predominant or preeminent among the different responsibilities that it has. But if you look at the legislative powers of the parliament, it cohabits with and has to be exercised in tandem with other powers of the parliament, which is to act as a representative body, to act as a deliberative body, and its lawmaking function ought to necessarily also show that each of these functions has been simultaneously being performed. So if the parliament makes a law on changing the Citizenship Act, that power has to be exercised through deliberations in the floor of the parliament, and that deliberation must ensure that the person who is most vulnerable and is not represented adequately in the parliament needs to be represented through the deliberative process. So there is in this entire debate a normative concern about the what is it and how is it that law is made, or law commensurate with the Constitution is made, and what are the processes through which the Constitution itself can be changed. Now, the Constitution Day, the day that we are holding this event, is somewhat of a unique event. And it's become unique not only because in 2015, the NDA government decided that it should be commemorated as an event in publicly. So why, as I speak now, there are simultaneously other lectures happening in other institutions, colleges and universities across the country. at 11 o'clock, for example, most academic institutions signed up or logged into a link where they read out the preamble. Now, the reading was led by the Prime Minister himself. So there was an event and a spectacle, a public event created around the Constitution for the Constitution Day. The significance of the event, however, goes back much further. And as the president mentioned, the significance of the event goes to the fact that this was the day that the Constitution was adopted, and specific provisions of the Constitution, including the citizenship provisions, including the provisions pertaining to elections, were made effective. And the other provisions came into effect much later, or some months later, on 26 January 1950. Now, in the sequence of the significance of 26th November and 26th January, it's important also to recall that most constitutional texts are traced to certain signposts. So the certain signposts are identified in the life of a constitution. And when an official history of a constitution is written, or an official history of a constitution to which we are accustomed to, or the history that we read when we were in college, I was in college, the history was traced largely through the different Government of India acts that the colonial government made, and in particular the Government of India Act of 1935 that everybody says now that served as a template for our constitution. There's a different history that's also traced, and there's an excellent book by Rohit Dey titled People's Constitution, which talks about different antecedents, and the antecedents are traced. And this is something that Granville Austin also says in his book Cornerstone of a Nation, where he traces the Nehru Report to the Karachi Declaration, and also in the case of 26 January 1950, it's traced to the Lahore Declaration for Purna Swaraj, where the Congress decided that 26 January would be 1930 would be the day that they would announce that that's the destiny that the Indians have, and therefore for several years till India became independent, 26 January was observed as Independence Day. And therefore, when the Constitution was adopted on 26 November 1949, it was decided that it would be brought into force on 26 January, and in order to observe or keep the tryst with destiny, as Nehru said. However, we got independence on 15th August 1947, which was 2 years after the Japanese Empire fell through in the World War, and that was the day that the colonial rulers said that they would give us independence. So there was an imperial significance that was the significance that the British Empire accorded to the date in which we became free. So the history or the life of a constitution perhaps has these the signposts that one traces and writes alternative histories. There are different lives, different ways in which people, for example, when people, the parliamentarians take oath in the parliament, they take oath by the constitution. But so that's a register of the constitution that is invoked for or by the office bearers to say that they would be abiding by the principles, their behaviors would be subject to the constitutional promises and pledges, and they draw all the authority from the constitution. There's nothing that the authority does not exceed that which is given by the constitution, and ultimately it is held by the people. So the source of authority, the sovereignty that is affirmed through the constitution is not of the state or the people who represent the state, but of the people who are the source of authority. So the taking oath in the parliament to say that they would to work in consonance with constitutional values is also an affirmation of the leaders' subjection to the will of the people, the popular sovereignty. There's another register on which the Constitution is invoked. And this is again about the life of the Constitution. And I would recall here a couple of years back, maybe, a schoolgirl in the streets of Moscow was reading out the Constitution to the Russian riot police and reminding them that she had all the power to come and be there in the street with other people to ask that the election to the municipal corporations in the city of, or local body elections in the city of Moscow must not be suspended. And closer at home, in the beginning of this year and the end of last year, we saw the Constitution, particularly preamble reading, becoming part of the protests that people held in the streets to invoke constitutional premises and promises to remind the government that they should listen to the people when they take important decisions which affect people's lives as citizens. So when we talk about the Constitution as a living document, we talk about the fact that the Constitution is a document that changes, but also that it connects with and to the people in ways that would enhance constitutional democracy. And it also kind of talks about the way in which people have historically connected with the Constitution. The Constitution of India is very young. It's not as old as the constitutions that came into existence after revolutionary ruptures in 1787, 1791, or 1789. No, our Constitution is a post-World War 20th century Constitution. And if one was to go back to that period of how people were relating to the Constitution, which was something that was being made in a place, in a city, and in a venue which was far removed from the lives of the people. A farmer in Champaran, for example, despite the fact that the farmer would have participated in the anti-colonial movement through a specific kind of struggle against the agrarian policies of the British government, the farmer was far removed from the processes of constitution making. But it's also the case that the activation of the Constitution after its inception was made by the ordinary people themselves. So that's another aspect of how a Constitution can be seen as a living document which impacts upon, and that's an excellent, the book that I referred to earlier by Rohit Day talks about a particular episode where a farmer, basically a farmer who grew provisions and then vended it. So it's a vegetable vendor in a small town in Jalalabad, became a victim of or became distressed by a particular policy of the local government, which gave license to another farmer, another person who grew vegetables and traded in vegetables, gave license to only one person to trade in vegetables, and everybody else who was also in a similar trade would then have to pay a small fee to this trader and to carry out their own trade. So this person, Yasins, approached the Supreme Court and demanded that that writ of mandamus be issued against the local body that handed out this decision, and to then compel this lower authority to declare this regulation ultra virus. The court would declare this regulation ultra virus and allow Yasin to carry out his fundamental right to trade and occupation, which was guaranteed by the Constitution. So the invocation by a vegetable vendor who was hitherto only a bystander in the big history of writing of the Constitution is, according to Day, very interesting, because Yasin was the first person to do that. So there is this archival research that Day has done, and Day seems to be convinced that this Yasin was the first person who invoked the Article 32 of the Constitution to ask the Supreme Court to issue instructions to this lower authority to draw back the regulation that it had issued. So what does this episode tell us about how people relate to the Constitution, and what are the ways in which large numbers of ordinary citizens, at the moment of the making of the Constitution, were looking at the Constitution itself. So Yasin's case is perhaps one case, but there are several other cases that Rohit Day has discussed in his book. Another for that period of inauguration of the Constitution, another important aspect of how the Constitution was impacting people's lives, or how people perceived the Constitution, was the way in which the electoral domain was being organized, in terms of a space, where people who had hitherto not participated in elections would, as a huge body of a mass of citizens would be enfranchised and would exercise would exercise their right to vote, which they had not done before. So we know that the 1946 elections, which elected the provincial councils, which then elected the Constituent Assembly, were held on a truncated franchise. And less than 15% of the people, based on education and property criteria, were eligible to vote. Now, even before the Constitution came into existence, or the election and citizenship provisions of the Constitution came into force, the process of creating an electorate had already been set in motion. So the entire process of registering people as citizens had come into play in 1947 onwards, and a secretariat had been installed in the Parliament building to ensure, even before an election commission had been set up, to register citizens, to enroll people as voters, even before they'd become citizens. So there's again an interesting book by Onit Shani, How India Became Democratic, where she, through archival sources, she goes through the entire process, even the smallest detail of how government officials, who too were not familiar with the exercise of holding elections, were being trained into a democratic disposition of becoming part of a democratic polity. So there are interesting details about how this was done. There are details about how the Election Commission, or through the Representation of the People's Act, which was also made piecemeal and not as a single statute at the same instance, insisted that people register as individuals. So a lot of women, for example, in Rajasthan and Bihar, did not register because they gave their names, registered in the names of their husbands or their sons, and their names were subsequently removed from the electoral roll, disenfranchising practically, effectively, a large number of women. But Nonetheless, despite the fact that an exercise of of voting in a modern context was being instituted in a traditional society, the entire process of enumeration was different from other processes of enumeration that are associated with, for example, Aadhaar, or for example, the National Population Register or the National Register of Citizens, was different because it was expected to unleash popular sovereignty. So there was an unfettering of popular sovereignty that this exercise of enumeration of people as voters was being carried out. So there is again then this association between the Constitution as a living document in terms of not just how the Constitution itself has had many lives, but how Constitution is imbricated in the lives of people themselves. Now, in this context, and since they're also students, I would also want to flag that constitution making the world over has taken place through different waves. So that the post-war constitutions are probably the third wave that people talk about, and third wave was in the context of the Second World War, where the victors made the constitutions for those who lost. So the German Constitution was, for example, made by Allied powers. So was of the Constitution of Japan. So there is then the constitution making process for most of these countries in the post-World War context was done under conditions of limited sovereignty. So there was none of these countries made their constitutions in a way where they could say that the people on their own, without constraints from another sovereign power, had made their constitutions. Now, the Indian Constitution, it's a peculiar instance where it's as a post-colonial constitution, which has had this official history of many Government of India acts. The post-colonial constitution was embedded in a prior history of constitution making. But it was also aspiring to chart out a course which was different from the past. So there was this an entire literature on transformative constitutionalism, which talks about the way in which post-colonial societies or post-authoritarian societies went through a process of democratization, made manifest in their constitution-making activities. So you have you have India, for example. You have South Africa, for example, or you have the Constitution of Brazil, for example, which are constitutions that have been seen as embodying the transformative. The transformative where the state is expected to take an active part in charting a different future from the past for the people who have been subjected to different kinds of regimes. Now, when one looks at the idea of the transformative, and I'll spend some time talking about the idea of the transformative itself, the South African Constitution is seen as being an exemplar of what a transformative constitutionalism looks like. So Upendra Bakshi, for example, who, as Imtiaz would recall, I love quoting. So this particular article on transformative constitutionalism that Bakshi has written, he looks at he and I also have the constitutional text of South Africa with me, and the text of the 1996 post-apartheid constitution, and this is no different from the constitution in the 1960s, where the preamble of the South African constitution actually takes recourse to the will of God and invokes divine authority to lay down the provisions of that constitution. Now, in this post-apartheid constitution, the people are invoked. We, the people of South Africa, recognize the injustices of the past. So there's a recognition of there's something wrong that has happened in the past that has wounded the society as a whole. And there has to be, therefore, we all know the mechanism of Truth and Reconciliation Commission, a diagnostic of that, the society, the wound that has been inflicted on society. And apart from the diagnostic, there has to be a way in which a therapeutic constitution has to be put in place. And therapeutic constitution would mean that we not just recognize the wrongs that have been done in the past, but we would together see that divisions in society are rolled back, and we would move towards a society that is equal. Now, a metaphor that is invoked in the preambulatory statement of the South African Constitution is that of the bridge. Now, that the people are moving from an unstable past to an uncertain future. And this movement, the process of moving is that of a connection. So the past is not totally truncated. The past has to be recalled and remembered in a particular way. And the people are going to be on the bridge for a long time. It's a permanent ideal. It's a permanent ideal, and they have to be on the bridge in order to ensure that the movement towards the future is a continuous process. So the idea of the transformative has been embodied in the South African Constitution of 1996 is something that people also invoke in other constitutions of the global South. So Indian Constitution in a particular way, in its own specific way, is also seen as a constitution embodying the transformative. And Bakshi would say that this transformative in the Indian Constitution is different because, different from South Africa, because the Constitution was made by an unelected oligarchy. It says it wasn't a representative body that made the Constitution, but through different processes of deliberation, through committee systems, through, as Granville Austin would say, through mechanisms or innovations of making constitution, the modalities of making a constitution through consensus. So there is a deliberative consensus, sometimes agonistic. What the differences are, but there is a consensus that you have evolved of what the procedures are to be. A promise that you've made through the objectives resolution, and you, through consensus, through deliberation, through a certain amount of give and take through dialogue, you would arrive at a certain principles that you would adhere to. Nehru called it a tryst with destiny. So there was a transcendental aspect that Nehru gave to the Constitution, but Ambedkar called it a movement into a contradictory space. A contradiction between social inequality and political equality, which would lead to, or which would imperil Indian democracy if it was allowed to sustain for long. But what was the transformative in the Indian context? And Bakshi would say that the identification of the contradiction by Ambedkar by itself was an identification or a statement of an insurgency, where the idea that something has to be rolled back, and the provisions of the Constitution have to specifically ensure that the past is negotiated in a particular way, the past is articulated in a particular way. So you would have your fundamental rights and directive principles of state policy and the preambulatory statement that would perhaps lay down the pledge and promises that people would be making. And that would be an example of a transformative constitution. Now, Imtiaz, I have about 5 minutes, I think. No.
He's logged off, ma'am, because maybe there is a power problem or something like that. He will be
Yeah,
joining.
yeah, sure.
You
So,
have
so I would take.
It's up to you, ma'am. You have a leverage to take another 10-15 minutes as well. It's up to you, ma'am.
Okay, all right. So one of the things, and I'm rather fond of this story, and I think with the students in the audience, this would strike a chord. The idea of the transformative in literature. No? So there's this story by Sadat Hasan Manto, and Manto talks about the new constitution, and when he a story around the new constitution. And the protagonist in Manto's story is a Tonga driver, Mangu. So he's a person who is not educated, he's an illiterate person, but he's generally considered a wise person, by his peer group. And this story was written in the context of the Government of India Act of 1935. So Mango is somebody who is consistently intimidated by the Gora Sahabs, the British soldiers in the cantonment that Mango plies his tonga in. And there's this feeling of complete emasculation that Mango feels when this happens to him. So one day, since he listens to the conversations that's happening in his tonga, he hears or he learns that there is the new law that is going to come into existence, and this new law is going to make Indians their own masters. So he is completely enthused by the idea that he would no longer be subservient to the Gora Sahabs, and he would be ultimately a person, a man, and so the evening before the 1st of April 1935, Mango spruces up his tonga and purposely takes the tonga to the cantonment area where his tormentors, the Gora Sahab, would regularly wait for him. As soon as he reaches that spot and he sees those Gora Sahabs, he starts beating them up, and he says, "No, you're still cocky on 1st of April. No, we have a new law." So then they are completely taken by surprise, and soon enough the police comes and packs Mango up and throws him in the lockup. And the police fella says, "No, what new law are you talking about? It's the same old law." So the story is interesting because it talks about, in some ways, the bewitchment that the idea of sovereignty, which would be brought in through the instrumentality of a law, has for large numbers of people. But there is also then this idea of disappointment, with what kind of freedom will this law bring? So there is this constant the presence of the old forms of the new state is something that that's there in Manto's story, and that's a constant kind of problem in the way one looks at constitutions and constitutional democracy, is how a constitutional democracy reconciles with a state which may not be democratic. So how do we bring these irreconcilable entities together, a state which has a monopoly over the use of power and would make large masses of people vulnerable, and then the idea of a constitutional democracy put in place through the mechanisms of a higher order law that would legitimate state actions, because all state actions would refer to the constitution. Even a law that is seen as wrong by large numbers of people would be seen legitimate because it's been passed through the procedures that has been laid down by the Constitution. So that irreconcilability is something that Manto's story talks about. And it is this irreconcilability that Ambedkar was also referring to in his the speech that the president referred to in the Constituent Assembly, where he talked about, or he grappled with the idea of the durability of of democracy in India, considering that large numbers of people had no idea of, or had not lived in a democracy, or had or were saturated with something that he called constitutional morality. And it's an interesting idea that he borrows from Grote, to say that there is ethics of just means in political action. So if you want to disobey, that disobedience has to be constrained to self-restraint. There can be free criticism of the state, but that free criticism has to be done under conditions of self-restraint. And the emphasis on self-restraint, on peaceable action, on an ethics of just means is something that he ascribes to, or he desires, both in those who are the rulers of the country and those who are ruled. So the citizens as well as the government are, or have to be bound by the same morality. And it's interesting that the idea of constitutional morality is invoked, something that was articulated as a principle for the sustenance and durability of democracy, is invoked as a judicial principle by the Supreme Court in various decisions. And one of the major decisions that effectively invoked constitutional morality was the judgment in Nas Foundation case. Where the judges say that constitutional morality would provide critical morality for the judges to substitute and displace arguments that are coming forward as a public morality. So there's an article in the Indian Express today which talks about public morality. And so Ambedkar was sure that public morality is something that needs to be constantly tested and subjected to critical morality. And that critical morality will come from constitutional morality, which is spread across the text of the Constitution. And a second thing, and I'll end here, is the idea that there's something. What would hold a constitutional polity together, a democracy together, would be the fact that people have and express something called public conscience. So public conscience is something that Ambedkar emphasized, where the ethics of action that was passive and under restraint in constitutional morality meets a different kind of ethics with public conscience, where the idea of suffering, and that the idea that a suffering of another person can impact me, and I can be empathetic to that suffering, and be in the street or be a dissident because I cannot wait till I suffer personally. So the fact that the anti-apartheid movement was supported by white young men and women is something that he talks about, and the fact that the fact that a large number of people belonging to the scheduled castes and Dalits were completely suppressed and under a rule that was being claimed under an entire people, whereas it was only by a majority, was something that, according to Ambedkar, could be rolled back if the ethic of public action could be determined by empathy and people being aware of sufferings of people. other people. So I'll end here on a note which I think is sufficiently positive to say that all of us are capable of expressing, having that capacity to be publicly conscious and express our consciousness when the time requires. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. You covered a range of the issues which actually enlighten not only us, much more beneficial to all our students. You covered a range of issues really, from leadership to public consciousness to how to invoke the dilemma between power and the constitutional democracy, the whole range of the issues which we need to think over and we need to practice, much more importantly in that kind of situations we all are having. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation and to be here with us and to enlighten all of us on the day of a special occasion where we all are turned ourselves into British citizens from India's British subjects into India's citizens. Thank you very much, ma'am. Now I request Professor Prabhavati to vote of thanks.
Thank you so much, Professor Roy. I'm very happy to have this chance to thank Professor Anupama Roy for her talk on Indian Constitution as a living document. And Professor Roy, you really brought the topic alive to all of us, and you gave us really valuable insights into the fact that the tension over who holds the key to the Constitution is likely to continue to remain as long as the power to amend is in the hands of the Parliament and the courts have the authority of judicial review. But even to a lay person like me, who is not an expert in political science and whose reading of the Constitution has been very, very surface level, you have driven home the point that while we cannot treat the Constitution with that sanctimonious reverence, as though it's something too sacred to be touched, we can at the same time not really allow frivolous attempts to revise Constitution every time there is any kind of a political deadlock. And I particularly enjoyed, I'm sure so did our students, the stories and anecdotes that you have shared with us to help us see that there have been several instances where the Constitution actually came alive in popular imagination, so much so that ordinary people attribute meaning to the existence of the Constitution, and also to the fact that we are able to take recourse to the Constitution and argue with it and focus on how constitutional remedies can be used by the citizens. And thank you so much for also concluding your talk on a very positive note. I really am delighted to have had this chance, and we hope to have more such interactions with you in the future. Thank you, Professor Nagendra, for making this happen, and Imtiaz for inviting Professor Roy. I also thank all our students, colleagues, and other friends who have joined us this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Have a great day, ma'am.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure having you here.
Bye-bye.
Bye.